and welcome to another edition of the Coach and Benway podcast. I'm Coach Red Pill. I'm joined by my co-host, as always, Dr. Benway. Dr. Benway, how are you today? And what are the lovely things that we are going to be discussing?
We're going to discuss some people who really seem to have a fondness for white people. They like to make it known. You know, some people hide their preferences, and others try to sugarcoat it, and then some just really make it known just how much
they love white people.
How much joy in their heart, because as the Bible tells us, it is love that will lead us to the promised land.
Yeah.
We are naturally talking about Sarah Jeong, the recent recent contributor to the New York Times editorial group. In other words, the slate of columnists they have giving opinions on this, that, and the other. I think she came from The Verge, and I think she was writing about the internet and technology. I by the way, I just love anybody who says, like, what is your topics? I write about the internet. That's like me saying, well, what do you write about? I write about Earth.
Yeah, I write about the air. Yeah, it's just really stupid. But anyway, this woman, I'll read some of the choice quotes I have in front of me. These are tweets that went out publicly, and they are not ironic, apparently. Quote, dumbass fucking white people marking up the internet with their opinions like dogs pissing on fire hydrants. Another one. Oh man, it's kind of sick how much joy I get out of being cruel to old white men. Another one. I dare you to get on Wikipedia and play things white people can definitely take credit for. It's really hard. Another one. Are white people genetically predisposed to burn faster in the sun, thus logically being only fit to live underground like groveling goblins? Another one. Hashtag cancel white people. Another one. 1. White people are bullshit. 2. No one cares about women. 3. You can threaten anyone on the internet except cops. Well, that wasn't so bad. That was the least bad one of the ones you got. Another one. I just realized why I can't stand watching Breaking Bad or Battlestar Galactica. The premise of both is just white people being miserable. Oh, God. Oh, God.
Yeah, so you could really see that there's love in this woman's heart, or or jealousy, if you will. So hey, look, here's the funny part about this whole situation, right? It's it's hard to think of this outside or in a vacuum as this unique event, right? So we not too long ago, internet time feels like ages. What, a week ago, 2 weeks ago, the whole James Gunn incident where, he seems to have a predilection for tweets that are comedic points of view on pedophilia.
Right.
Who would have guessed? Who would have thought it? And Disney decided to fire him, to the chagrin of the Ben Shapiros of the world, of course, I must admit.
Yes.
But and so in that context, this bimbo, because she wants to express her choice words of love for white people, I'm more than happy to return the favor to her. Her attitude, again, a few years ago, was all of these choice quotes we had. But she's hired by the New York Times editorial board because they want her opinion. They think she writes brilliantly and thought-provokingly on interesting topics in reputable publications. People bring this to the attention of the New York Times, and the New York Times' response is predictably talking out of both ends of their mouth and not doing anything.
Let me read the response. This is the statement from the New York Times after this whole brouhaha over this imbecile, because that's what she is. No, let's call it what she is. This racist cunt. That's what she is, okay? This is the statement that the New York Times released after they hired and continue to back this racist cunt. Quote, we hired Sarah Jeong because of the exceptional work she has done covering the internet and technology at a range of respected publications. Her journalism and the fact that she is a young Asian woman have made her a subject of frequent online harassment. For a period of time, she responded to that harassment by imitating the rhetoric of her harassers. She sees now that this approach only served to feed the vitriol that we too often see on social media. She regrets it, and the Times does not condone it. We had candid conversations with Sarah as part of our thorough vetting process, which included a review of her social media history. She understands that this type of rhetoric is not acceptable at the times, and we are confident that she will be an important voice for the editorial board moving forward. End of statement.
All the news that's fit to print, right?
Yeah, yeah. So it's okay that she's a racist because it's against white people, because racism is power and privilege, of course. What the fuck, you know?
Right, exactly. Well, yeah, their attitude is like, hey, we know it's not okay, but we understand that those circumstances of her situation was that she's just trying to deal with the situation. I'm trying to portray them as retarded as possible because I think they are. Because you and I have talked about this before. There's really limited talent that actually gets into journalism these days, for obvious reasons. This isn't so much a shock to me. I think there are crowds in left-wing or progressive circles who are naturally feeling defensive, especially after the James Gunn situation. I bet they think to themselves, we're going to take a freaky stand against these right-wing harassers who are trying to just be very candid and truthful about things we've put in public already, So, go fuck yourself. And The Verge's response, which is where she's written previously, their attitude was even worse. I don't know if you saw their written statement.
No, what was it?
Effectively, their written, I don't have it in front of me, so I'm paraphrasing. Effectively, their statement was similar introduction. Online harassment against her has just got to stop. These are tactics that they started using in Gamergate. And of course they got to throw in Gamergate. And they even threw in the whole notions of ethics in journalism. It's just a front to fuck with people who aren't white. And I'm thinking to myself, way to just express the fact that you are petrified of the fact that people are using your tactics against you again.
Yeah.
I'm more than happy for this now. I mean, as I've said before, I do think, there's going to be pushback. Things are going to get aggressive. I think one of the pushback you're kind of seeing now is the left wing is now changing their stance and saying, we're going to take a freaky stand against this censorship man. And of course, it's hypocritical. It goes against their own thinking. They're full of shit. But the one thing, as I've said before, and I'll say it again, hypocrisy is not a problem. They're constant on the same thing, which is they know who their enemies are and they'll do whatever they want to either beat them or resist them. And that's the nature of kind of where we're at right now with this situation.
Yeah.
Now, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to agree with you that they really are. It's not just take no prisoners. It's whatever is necessary to win. And they've proven themselves now, especially now that, look, I insist. I think a lot of the vitriol that's emerging from the left right now is because they are sort of like waking up from the hangover of the Obama administration, and they realize that the Obama administration was really a Clintonite administration that did absolutely nothing. And worse than that, it left the country worse off than before in every metric: the foreign policy, public finances, social relations. I mean, the things are worse in 2000, following the Obama administration than before the Obama administration. And, now they're taking it out on Trump and everybody who's on the right wing. That's my thinking.
It's what's interesting. This is tangential, but related. This whole, because I think there's some meat to what you're saying about the hangover of the Obama years. It's kind of, it's not perfectly one-to-one, but it's reminiscent to me of the evolution of the baby boomers and through the 60s into the 80s and beyond. So obviously in the 60s, it's all about, peace, love, and dope shit. And then in the 70s and 80s, suddenly it's like, well, it's all about getting for me and mine.
Right.
And, it's in some sense, from a strict morals, you use morals loosely here, but from their strict ethics standpoint of what they believed in, they kind of really rejected that into sort of like, I'm going to just get what I want. And then the fact that, Reagan came about and, the 80s were the 80s, there's a sense of guilt and resentment just brewed, and everybody just got kind of even more bitchy on the baby boomer left. It kind of feels like this with the Obama, Obama comes in, it's like, give hope a chance, peace, love, and dope comes again. We're all a progressive family and the world is going to evolve. And my God, he can win a Nobel Peace Prize as a potential for the future. But in the reality, going through the Obama administration, it's, we're all getting for me and my own. I'll use the rhetoric of progressive politics to make a career out of clickbait and an orgiastic hatred on media. I'll do my white knighting shit and get wonderful jobs in a progressively leaning tech company which does everything in its power to treat the individual like a commodity, to just accepting blindly of the foreign policy nonsense to the point where now the left wing is just prepared to go headlong into a nuclear war with Russia because reasons.
Yeah. Yeah.
This feels very similar in the sense that when someone takes such or pretenses to a very strong moral position on society, particularly when that moral position rhetorically comes across as revolutionary,
Mm-hmm.
and when push comes to shove and they reveal themselves to be as venal
Yeah.
as your typical human, if not more so,
Mm-hmm.
they get really angry because nobody wants to be called out on their own hypocrisy.
Yeah.
So they foam at the mouth quicker.
Yeah.
They attack more viciously.
Oh, yeah.
They project. And they try desperately to, I think, convince themselves that they were not the ones at fault.
Yeah, they didn't start it. It was the other guy who did it. Yeah, that's their whole rationale. Now, look, I find these people fucking despicable. I mean, bottom line, I just find them fucking despicable. I'm looking at The Verge's response. Let me read choice quotes. You can read Sarah's own statement about her tweets here, but as the editors of The Verge, we want to be clear. This abusive backlash is dishonest and outrageous. The trolls engaged in this campaign are using the same tactics that exploded during Gamergate, and they have been employed in recent years by even broader audiences amid a rise in hostility towards journalists. From cries about, quote, ethics in journalism to fake news, journalists have been increasingly targeted by people acting in bad faith who do not care about the work they do, the challenges they face, or the actual context of their statements. Oh, God, it's just so much bullshit. It's just so much, I'm sorry I did the voice on this stuff.
Well, no, I do that all the time.
Yeah,
I mean, it's fart sniffing of the purest form.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
And it kind of dovetails nicely to the other kind of journalistic pat yourself on the back, suck your own dick event today with Jim Acosta at the White House was like, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, I think you gotta apologize for saying journalists are the enemy of the people. That's really mean, and I don't think we deserve that. Kind of thing. And Sarah just told him to go fuck himself after you tell me how much of an ugly cow I am, that I'm the only press secretary who needs Secret Service protection because of you people. You have your role to play in this. Don't come to me for sympathy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because I didn't know that stuff about her being the first press secretary who needs Secret Service protection, and that is outrageous. Okay, she's just the mouthpiece of the administration. I mean, she's very capable at her job, and it's a very difficult job. I'm not saying this in a derogatory fashion, but her job is to put out what the White House thinks. She's not there to be disrespected that way.
Yeah, there's no reason that someone with that job should be in a place of such insecurity with regard to the public that the secrets police, the Praetorian Guard of America need to protect her. It should not be that way. No. But the journalists have created that situation, and I would remind the Jim Acostas, the Sarah Jeongs of the world, that look, in the past few years, I cannot give you an example of a journalist really attacked for being a journalist. Yes, there were people who shot up the guy that shot up that journalism or that newspaper office, but it was just a guy who was pissed off at someone there.
Yeah, that didn't count. That was like a personal beef. It wasn't like because
exactly.
Of
it was bullshit. Yeah, but I can give you several instances of Trump supporters being attacked for Trump supporters. I can give you an instance of a mentally handicapped white boy kidnapped by 3 black people and then abused physically on
viciously.
Facebook.
Yeah, viciously.
Torture. I can give you an example of a United States congressman who was nearly assassinated because of left-wing bullshit artists.
Yeah.
It is our side that is being attacked. I refuse, and I frankly am disgusted to a certain extent with the silence of the president on this matter.
Insofar as Sarah Sanders?
Well, not just Sarah Sanders, but I would say the attacks that have been made on the people who take a risk to support him publicly and the fellow, the Republican, Steve Scalise, who was shot, and also, by the way, apparently now Steve Scalise's kids are being threatened because that's what you do.
What?
Apparently, yeah. I was just glossing through Breitbart actually, and it's Scalise's children threatened. I haven't read it,
You're
so
kidding.
bear with me. I know, I don't know all the details, but
Okay,
I
we'll
can certainly
leave
believe
that
it.
there out there for the
Yeah.
time being, unconfirmed. Okay,
But needless to say, the president has every right at this point to say, look, your rhetoric is coming close to the point of getting our people killed. Why should I, pretend like, oh, there's stuff to go around on all sides here. Only one side is being subjected to this level of violence
yeah,
consistently. The media never has paused to think if it has a responsibility on this front. And to add insult to injury, I remember after Steve Scalise got shot, one of the media responses was it was Trump's rhetoric that was doing this, not their response to Trump, not the constant notion that there's a traitor in the White House who's a Russian sleeper agent, a la the Manchurian Candidate. No, it was that Trump uses nasty words.
yeah. Yeah, well, look, this is my thinking at this point. I think that the left-wing vitriol is going to continue, and it's going to get worse after the 2018 midterms, which at this time they're actually not looking so good for the Democrats, because it's always the economy, stupid, and whether he is responsible for it or not, the economy at the United States, there's a perception that it is doing well. I'm not going to get into the arguments because you can start looking at the figures and you can say all kinds of things. I personally think that this is just the calm before the storm, but that's just me. The political perception for November of 2018 is that the economy is doing well. Trump is not as crazy as people paint him to be. And anybody who's slightly moderate and says anything mildly nice about him gets, vilified by the left, which drives more supporters towards Trump, right? Because nobody wants to be called a Nazi just because they don't think that somebody is totally evil, right?
What was that? There's also a recent story on this
Yeah,
front, not
I heard it.
about
Yeah,
Trump. There was that it was a university dean, I think,
yeah.
or some sort of
Oh,
university
yeah, poor bastard.
administrator.
Yeah,
He had his personal friend, I
from
forget,
childhood,
from childhood, running for Congress. I don't even
running
think in the
for
constituent.
governor.
Oh, governor. Yeah, I don't even know if it's in the same constituency as where he teaches. It to a certain extent doesn't matter. He says, "Look, he's my personal friend from the old days. I have a lot of respect for him. I think he'd make a good leader." That's independent of the whole policies. And the fucking
Yep.
university community is like, we were pained to see someone who leads our school
Yeah, they had to
take
back
such a
off.
position.
Yeah,
And he basically had to say, "I apologize."
yeah.
Making an opinion. I've learned so much from you. It's like,
Yeah, I've learned that
you've
that you're gonna
learned
chop my balls off if I say the wrong goddamn thing. That's what I learned.
you learned that you could be punished for having a friend.
Mm.
Precisely it. He had a friend,
Yeah,
and he said that he was his friend.
yeah,
Pain, no pain of death and torture.
yeah. No, that was fucking ugly. I mean, that was really, really ugly. And I don't see how the left can recover from something like that. I mean, because it's sort of like cancerous, that kind of thing. Because those kinds of stories, they're not just one-offs, right? They're happening all over the place, and so it's inevitable that the normies get wind of these stories, and they're like, "Do I really want to get behind these people? These people that if I say the wrong fucking thing, I get clobbered." So that's why I'm thinking that the 2018 election, far from being a blue wave, it could very well be a red wave. And we know that in 2020, Trump is going to win. Trump is going to win. I mean, assuming everything the ship sails on as it's sailing on now, right? Because they're going to nominate Kamala Harris. That is obvious to me. I mean, I've been looking at the different candidates, the different potential candidates, their ages, and so forth. Elizabeth Warren is too old. She's in her 70s. She's just not going to be there for 2020. Bernie Sanders, he's going to be older still. Of the younger crowd, most of them, they come across as sketchy. The only one who seems sort of like on the level, the two candidates who seem sort of on the level, even though I despise both of them on a personal level, but that seem palatable, are Kamala Harris, the senator from California, the junior senator from California, and and Kirsten Gillibrand, the junior senator from New York. Now, the problem is that Kirsten Gillibrand has a re-election in 2020, and Kamala Harris does not. So it seems very clear to me that Kirsten Gillibrand, who is a very, very sharp customer, she actually went to Mike's school, by the way, and she had the reputation for being smart and on the ball and very ambitious. Well, I think that she's going to realize that she can't win in 2020. I think she's going to back off. She's going to pipe down and play the good, loyal soldier to Kamala Harris, and watch as Kamala Harris just goes down in flames, because Kamala Harris is not going to win against Donald Trump, and they're going to double down on that whole left-wing hysteria. So my issue becomes, what's going to happen on November 7th or 8th of 2020? How is the left going to respond there? Are they going to quadruple down on their hysteria? Or are they going to wake up and realize that they're fucking playing this game wrong? Because if they quadruple down on their hysteria, that's when things can get really fucking ugly. That's when things can go like really, really like totalitarian civil war kind of situation. That's my thinking at this point. I don't know about you. What do you think?
Yeah, that's certainly what I suspect might happen under repeated defeats.
Yeah.
Yet it happens when under two conditions: there's repeated defeats, and there's a recalcitrant attitude in the underlying ethic that caused those defeats. In other words, it's not my fault we lost; it's this crippling society; it must be destroyed. To a certain extent, this is Hitler's logic when he's in the bunker and decided that, well, if Germany failed me, Germany doesn't have the right to live, and I'm going to ask my soldiers to burn it down.
Yeah,
that's more or less the mindset that you're going to have. I think to go back earlier with regard to this kind of rhetoric being completely disgusting to the average person. I forget who said it, and I think it was actually a good point. And I keep sharing this idea with anyone, that all Trump really needs to do to a certain extent is take this, like I said, this bimbos at the New York Times, take her tweets and just read them out loud at his rally.
Yeah,
that's all he needs to do.
Yeah, I think that he's probably going to be doing that, because he's doing these rallies all the time. Because I think I think inevitably, if you're in the White House and you're getting all this shit from the press and you pay attention to the press, right? I think that you need the soothing vibe of standing in front of a big, friendly, roaring crowd, and they're saying nice things, and you just say whatever you want, and they eat it up. I mean, he needs that shit, right?
Anybody needs that, by the way.
Yeah.
That's the type of. That's what gets you through the day and keeps you with the energy and momentum to keep functioning.
Yeah.
Because there's easy, and he must be smart enough and has lived a life where this happens independent of being president, to know that when you're locked in your command center, it's very easy to find yourself poisoned by the control of information coming your way. You become a slave to the handlers to a certain extent.
Yeah.
I think he knows that going out amongst the public, and even if it's just a small sample set, maybe not fully representative of the broader public, it's big enough to where it's enough for him to say, okay, I'm doing something right.
Yeah. Yeah, you talk in front of 20,000 people who think that everything you say is wonderful. You're going to walk out of that room, off that stage, with pumped. You're going to feel it, right? I've had the opportunity to stand in front of relatively large crowds of a couple of thousand people who approved of the things I was saying, thank God. And you walk off feeling like you're on the moon. You feel good. You feel, you could rock on. Okay. Now he's doing, 2, 3, 4 of these a week sometimes, right? I mean, he's really going out there. It almost as if he's campaigning. And I think that must really pump him up and give him the mental energy and mental resilience to put up with this shit, because it's relentless. That entire press corps. I mean, we were talking about the Sarah Sanders thing, the entire press corps, everybody in that room is against Donald Trump. I mean, they hate his guts in a way that is excessive at this point, because they are refusing to see the reality of what kind of president. He's been on the job, a year and a half now? They are refusing to see what kind of a job he's actually doing. They just refuse to see it. They just hate him, and everything is just no, no, no. I actually have to say that I'm impressed that he was able to survive initially, because I think that must have been so crippling, especially to a guy like that who thrives on adulation. To get and who had relatively good relations with the press before he ran for president, before he became a possible contender. He did have good relations with the press, and so to have seen that must have been really a shock to his system. So you got to admire that the guy is soldiering on. Yeah, I mean, I am not a Trump fan. I am very clearly aware of his limitations. But I gotta admit that the guy is, he's handling himself and he's not losing his shit in a catastrophic way, in a way like our poor boy Elon Musk is losing his shit every other day, right? No, he's. I'm impressed.
Well,
I have to admit.
Eon did his mea culpa, to be fair to Elon's credit. But
What?
nevertheless, he apologized to the analysts who said we're asking stupid questions, which was frankly believable.
No,
But
no, no. That's an admission that he knows that the ship is going down. See, if he was
well,
confident in his company, he would have told them to
yeah.
fuck off.
Well,
What?
I don't necessarily want to have yet another
Mm.
another Elon Musk
No, that's boring.
discussion.
Yeah.
But it's just a side point to Trump. Yeah, Trump is, and I've said this before. He's operated on being liked to a certain extent. And that's not. I'm certainly using it as a somewhat criticism, but it's not a criticism in the sense that he's above and beyond the normal human condition. No, most humans want to be liked. That's the nature of our living in a society. But to his credit, he's been managing through it under circumstances which I think would have exhausted anyone,
Yeah.
frankly. And you have to, and there's a certain mentality which I really respect. Adam is like, which I think is part and parcel to like you get you get the vibe on the energy of 20,000 people agreeing with you. The other vibe you get is really getting energized by the people who hate you. You fuck with them so much that they freak out. And he knows how to play that game better than anyone I've ever seen. He gets them
trolling.
to spin around in circles,
Yeah.
like nobody's business.
Yeah, he knows how to troll. Yeah. I mean, he was trolling before they called it trolling.
Precisely. Yeah, and what's also interesting, someone brought up an idea, and I'm of two minds on this. It's related to all Trump has to do in the campaign rally is read the tweets from
Yeah.
Senorita Bimbo.
He's going to.
From
Yeah, he's going to.
So in addition to that, someone brought up a point that says, look, all you have to do now with the New York Times is say, why do I have to believe anything these racists say? They've already approved of racism.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. Yeah.
And fundamentally in this, because I've seen a lot of not Republicans, I should say right-wingers, have taken the recent attitude to say, hey, look, at the end of the day, this is a good thing for us because we can always just use this as an example of saying, hey, look at this fucked up, New York Times. Do you, use it as a recruiting tool, right? Here's my concern with that, and it's not because I disagree with it. It's a question I have in myself, which is to have an attitude like that, to say, hey, you know what, it's probably a good thing because it's recruiting. There's a certain detachedness we have when you take that line, which is to say something bad is good for the growth of the movement, or the growth of the politics. I think on the one hand, yeah, you're absolutely right. That's strategically what it is. But there's something about being that emotionally distant to something obviously egregious that I begin to worry. And this is going to sound like a weird line of logic, but hear me out. In the same way in literature and the arts that I think an excessive amount of irony and detachment numbs you and denatures you, I think to have that kind of attitude of like saying, oh, how does this play on the chessboard, functions a similar way where you're you're detached from it. You see, this is something I can use versus not use. To a certain extent, I get it. You have to think that way in order to succeed at a certain point.
Right.
But I feel like it turns you ultimately into the Paul Bagalas, the James Carvilles of the world, where like you don't come with the customers anymore. You're so emotionally soulless and detached. And I worry about that in myself sometimes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but are you talking about this specific issue with Sarah Jeong? Or just
it's
general?
It's not so much this in particular, but it's the general attitude that say, hey, I'm not going to come with the customers. I'm not going to say, hey, just the only attitude to have on this is to one of kind of, moral criticism. But if I take it from the perspective, like I said, removed, disassociated, and say, oh, this is ultimately going to be good for us because I can use it, I worry about, operating exclusively at that level for the rest of my life.
Well, I think that you should take the advice of Thomas Pynchon. He had that great line, keep cool but care. I mean, like in my own sense,
I think that's right. Yeah.
yeah, that would be the best approach to that given situation, because I understand what you're saying. You're worried about becoming desensitized and viewing it all as a game. Yeah, sure, that's understandable. But yeah, nobody wants to become James Carville or Paul Begala, right? The old time.
Not the least of which is that they're hideous men.
Well, yeah, well, or like Dick Morris on the other side.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But like my thinking is that you can analyze things coolly and rationally and still care about the fundamental issues. Now, insofar as the left is concerned, I'm relishing what's going on because their policies are coming through. The ends of their policies are coming through into their attitudes towards the world. Okay, and the fact that their quota systems and affirmative actions, all this bullshit, is coming through as what it ultimately is, which is racism against white people, and it's racism. Okay, this Sarah Jeong person, yeah, it's just kind of sick. I think, let me rephrase this: turning the political volume up to 11 is allowing us to see, or stress testing everybody in the political environment, is allowing us to see who's on which side. Like, for instance, like this thing, I just looked at a tweet here from Will Westcott. He's a Twitter guy, and he's pretty popular. And he says, Ben Shapiro, good for the New York Times that they didn't fire Sarah Jeong for the extreme anti-white tweets. Also, Shapiro, of course, there are legitimate racists, and we should target them. We should find them, and we should hurt their careers because racism is unacceptable. Yeah, Ben Shapiro is coming across as a guy who talks out of both sides of his mouth, because his agenda is not conservative. His agenda is pro-Israel. And he just doesn't give a rat's ass about anything other than the advancement of the state of Israel. And he's using conservative politics to achieve that goal. And so this is like a whole stress test. The Trump presidency is one gigantic political stress test where we are seeing who's on which side of the dividing line. Okay? And I'm realizing in my own case, because in my own case, I find Trump personally, on a personal level, hideous. I would not want to be at a dinner party with him under any circumstances. I mean, I could see myself having a wonderful time with Barack Obama, say, or even fucking Nancy Pelosi, for crying out loud, or Dianne Feinstein, right? But Trump, no, I would not want to be in a dinner party with him because I'd be bored silly. I know the kind of blowhard that he is on a personal level. But at the same time, I'm realizing that the guy is actually doing shit, and he's more or less going where I want him to go, politically speaking. So yeah, so on a political stress test, insofar as I am concerned, I see Trump, and I'm like, yeah, I don't like him personally, but I like what he's doing. So yeah, I'd vote for him again. Sure, no problem. I mean, against anybody and any candidate at this point. I think that he's doing a fine job as president. But other people, they are no longer seeing, it's. Do I make any sense in what I was saying about this notion of Trump as a stress test?
It is. It absolutely is a stress test because you've exasperated people to the point where they can't, play it. Like I said, funny enough, even though I talked about be worried about ironic detachment, it's a lot of these people who are in the thick of it, are so stressed out they can't play the ironic detachment game anymore, so they can't hide.
No.
I would also say that you have a much stronger stomach than I do if you think you're going to be able to go to a dinner party with Nancy Pelosi. I mean, if I were at a dinner party with her, I'd just be staring. I know, but if I were at a dinner party with her, I'd just be staring at her false teeth, waiting for them to drop into the soup.
No, I'd be asking you for investment advice, actually.
Nancy, where are you hiding all of the vineyard money?
Yeah, exactly.
Answer me yes. 3 taps for Northern California, 2 taps for Southern. Yeah, and for Ben Shapiro, I've responded to this for other people. I've talked enough about him where like I feel like I'm running out of extra things to say because I'm going to phrase it in a way that's intentionally paradoxical. He's consistent in his double standards.
Yeah.
It's very clear that people think, oh, he lacks such self-awareness. No, he's very self-aware. He's very consistent on the idea that when right-wingers are saying mean racist things, he feels that they have the right to be ostracized because he doesn't want to be labeled as one. And plus, if they say negative things against Jews, that's against him.
Yeah.
But when the left wing does it, it's about, hey, there's too much mob, mentality of punishing people online for having opinions and whatnot. And it said it's always that sided to the point where whether he's a Democratic sleeper agent or not is irrelevant because he functions that way.
Yeah.
And so you could just basically say he is a fifth columnist.
Yeah.
Whether that's his intention or not.
Yeah.
And so I think what is happening, and I think that frankly one of the good things over the past few weeks is the degree to which people on our side are able to see it more easily with him. I've noticed it for a longer time, as anybody who's listened to this podcast could tell you. And I think the fact that people are rejecting guys like him and seeing them for what they are is a good thing, because for the longest time, he's been the sort of intermediate path into harder right-wing politics.
Mm-hmm.
I think the sooner people don't, swallow his poison pill, the better.
Well, the thing is, he serves a useful purpose in the right. Being a gateway drug, if you will, to the right is something we want. Okay, and it's not that easy. Okay, and it's not that easy, especially for somebody to be energetic about it, but at the same time not be so threatening that you're like, ew, I'm turned off by the guy. He comes across to moderates, to even Democrats, as quote unquote reasonable. Okay, so he has a certain political use. I personally don't like him. I think that he's a hypocritical cunt, and so I don't like him, but I can see his uses, and I don't see a point of antagonizing him and throwing him off the bus, just because he is two-faced. So long as you know that he's two-faced, you can handle him. Or I suppose I'm saying, like the old Lyndon Johnson saying, it's better to have him inside the tent pissing out than outside pissing in. You know what I mean?
Well, I think he's already on the outside pissing in, so I don't think his losses, frankly, would be noticed because I don't think he's in the tent. I actually think there are much better gateway drugs that are much more palatable people.
Such as Steven Crowder.
Tim Pool.
Tim Pool. Oh, yeah. Well,
Tim Pool is absolutely...
Tim Pool is devastating because he's a liberal. That's the funny thing. That's why he's so perfect.
And his politics are probably more left-wing ultimately than Ben Shapiro's, but I still think he's a much better pathway into right-wing politics than Ben Shapiro ever really could be.
Yeah.
In part because I think Tim Pool is more willing to say a few things that Ben just absolutely won't.
Such as?
So in the Sarah Jeong thing, Tim Pool actually had the opinion that, look, someone had posted, and I think it may have been in 4chan or somewhere, who knows, the argument that says, hey, exactly what I said, this is going to be a recruiting boon for the hard right, the alt-right, what have you, because it's overt racism that's being mainstreamed and apologized for by the New York Times, and there's nothing that's going to make you more recalcitrant and defensive of your white identity than being attacked for it. And I think Tim Pool said, fundamentally, this argument's probably right. And I think the New York Times is going to have to deal with that. Look, and I think Tim Pool is just accurate about that. I think Tim Pool has been very honest about the immigration challenges and, frankly, devastating consequences in Scandinavia. I think he's had enough reasoned opinions to where even if his domestic politics, in terms of how the state distributes money and whatnot, are liberal, fundamentally he is within the tent on the core tenets of the social issues, which is, we can all argue about policy until the cows come home. Policy arguments are not true political differences. True political differences get closer to a notion of identity and the friend-enemy distinction and who shares with you the society. And Tim understands that. Whether he would phrase it that way or not, he understands that.
Yeah, and the differences that he has with the right are policy differences. They're not fundamental principle differences, but whereas the left has fundamental principle differences, because he believes in objective truth. He is sophisticated in his vision of thinking that people can have multiple points of view of a situation, but ultimately there's just one truth. Okay, and it's a steady state. Where you're standing on the chessboard, yeah, sure, you have different points of view on the situation and therefore different quote unquote truths. But he ultimately does believe in a single objective truth that can be gotten to if you just dig hard enough. And I think that that's the fundamental difference between him and the left. And so for all his bullshit talk about being a leftist, he's not a fucking leftist. He's a right winger. He just doesn't know it yet.
Right, which is I think part of the reason why I consider him a much better entry point than Ben Shapiro, in part because even if Tim Pool conscientiously thinks he's a liberal, his mental model is more in unison with us. Whereas Ben Shapiro's mental model is not.
No, his mental model is liberal.
By no stretch.
Yeah, it's liberal and it is relativistic, and yeah, he's all about his people. He just does. It's so funny because he is in favor of an ethno-state. It's the Jewish ethno-state, not the white one. That's the bottom line issue. I mean, him and Richard Spencer are kissing cousins. It's just one is circumcised and the other is not, and one wants it for circumcised people and the other wants for uncircumcised people. That's the bottom line difference between the two. They're basically the same. And it's really funny. It's really funny because Richard Spencer, for all his being a Nazi and blah blah, he never has said anything even remotely as racist as this Sarah Jeong girl. It's unbelievable. I mean, not even close. Somebody did the exercise of turning all of her tweets and replacing the words with black.
Yeah.
And God, they were horrifying. I mean, they were stuff that would get you. I mean, apart from being deplatformed from Twitter instantly, they would get you pilloried. I mean, they would, in a literal sense, in a sense of stoned to death, that people would chase you on the street with bits of broken pavement to knock you on the head and kill you. I mean, that's what it sounded like, some of these tweets, if you just replace the word white for black. Jesus Christ.
Precisely. And here, this is something that's been on my mind for a while. I mean, and well before we started talking to each other, even doing this podcast, I have seen, and for years in my life, a certain type of liberal Asian, typically Chinese.
Yeah.
The Japanese don't do this very much. Typically Chinese American attitude, which is to pretend like they're a victim when they absolutely have zero cause to believe that.
Also, I know exactly what you're talking about, and I'd also venture to say it's Koreans too. Koreans have that attitude too.
All I can tell from experiences with Chinese, I'll take your word for on the Koreans because I haven't interacted with them as much. Mm-hmm. But yeah, Chinese Americans, at least the ones I work with, are as white as anybody comes. They sound like white people. They engage in all the same quote unquote trashy white culture.
Yeah.
And yet they play this game like, oh, I remember when I graduated, Asian, when my graduation ceremony, the commencement speech was by some Asian bimbo at the school who's like, it pains me that no one will understand my journey. It's like, what, your journey from Westchester to Hyde Park? Yeah, it's a fucking rough travel across the seas.
Yeah. It was just like one of the boat people. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's funny because like my father, and she's talking about this roughness, and my father's like, son, you do know that I was probably a year away from being born into slavery. I said, yes, I know. My father's parents were Poles captured during World War II. My grandfather was a slave laborer on a German farm. My grandmothers, both of them, knew each other in one of the camp systems. I know a little bit more from family history about roughing it. than any of these folks do. But they play up this game, and here, like I said, this is why Poles and other Eastern Europeans, we just look at each other and we're like, we don't give a fuck what you think on this front. We don't. We're like, we try not to play this, this victim game, in part because no one would fucking listen to us anyway. And yet we listen to a bunch of people who make more money than we did, frankly, have a much better lifestyle than we did, and then suddenly they're saying, I gotta join the game too because hey, at least they don't look white. It's like, go fuck yourself. You're going into law school. You're going into some consulting firm. Give me a break with this whole notion that like whatever her face was saying, like, look at this mean tweet. It was like an unliked tweet of someone calling her a gook.
Yeah,
oh
deal.
God, Jesus, big fucking deal. Let me tell you how many times I've been called a dumb Polak or some other, or because I'm partly Russian. When I was a little kid, people always would say I'm a communist traitor to the country. I'm like, you don't even know who the fuck I am. I mean, and all this other shit. So this is just the latest round of like saying, hey, we get to be part of the victim pyramid too.
Yeah.
So I probably have lost my path of what I was saying on this front.
No, we've been ranting about this shit. I mean, that's basically, this conversation has gone a little bit in that direction. But look, I think that at the end of the day, how can I put this? I just want to know where this shit is going to end. Okay, I want to know if the left is going to wake the fuck up and chill the fuck out and get back to normalcy, or if they're going to go full on civil war, pick up weapons, motherfucker, because I'm going to kill you. I want to know which is which. I hope it's civil war. Okay, because I think that long term, a civil war would be better, because this kind of the left is clearly lost its mind because of an intellectual poison, or perhaps it's just that the leftists have always been like this, and they just pick different poisons over the years. Before it was socialism, now it's postmodernism, and racialism, or whatever the fuck. Who knows what? But maybe it's just a mentality, and maybe we should just fucking purge them. Purge them, have a civil war, have it out, just kill the motherfuckers, and just be done with it, and move on as a society without these people. Because, at the end of the day, it's a minority that are pushing this bullshit. A very extreme minority. I would venture to guess of the left-wingers, it's maybe 1 or 2% that, go on vitriolically, right? And the others are just useful idiots, just the sheep following the sheepdogs, right? So my thinking is that what we should do is just have it out, have a good old-fashioned civil war. I mean, if they continue on this path of insanity after the 2020 election, let's duke it out, man. Let's go out on the street and let's slug it out. And let's see who's left standing. If they best us, well, so be it. That's the way of life. But this prolonged indecision.
That's the Heideggerian approach, which is you only really manifest your way of life by willing to support it in the face of death.
Yeah.
Which is basically where we're at now. I think to a certain extent, well, here's partly why I think some sort of civil conflict is inevitable. It's inevitable. Well, let's put it this way. If it doesn't happen and there is no successful abatement of the shall we say, demographic re-evolution of the country, namely, if we just continue to accept that, hey, the browning of America is going to happen, all of these new people will come in, then the reality of the situation is South Africa. By that, because then there will be enough people willing and able to, take the land without the compensation.
Yeah.
To use their lingo. That will happen.
Yeah.
Because it's how things happen.
Yeah, because it's happening. In South Africa, for those of you who don't know, the ANC just passed a law that amends their constitution that they can strip land without compensation. So basically, they're going to start doing that to white farmers and redistribute it to black people, because the black people have been so marginalized in South Africa, even though they are 90% of the population, and they have had effective control of the country since 1990. But so they're so racially oppressed by that 10% minority white people that they passed this law. They're going to strip them of their land, and God alone knows what's going to happen. I mean, shit. I don't understand the South Africans who are fucking there still. Okay, I mean, this shit. It's not that it's happening now. You saw this shit happening for years, and well, they fell into the sunken cost fallacy. That's my thinking. that they figured, they'd sunk so much of their effort and work and not just financial capital, but emotional capital
Yes.
into the land, that they were like, no, we're not going to leave. We're not going to leave. And now it's just too fucking late.
Well, I can't blame someone who refuses to run from their homeland. This is partly why in the Civil War I am a Southern sympathizer to a certain extent, because part of the mythology of the South is that very notion that like the South, that we were tied to the land. We believed in the sense of
Yeah.
your place in the world relative to the stars above your homestead.
Yeah.
I can't begrudge anybody for not wanting to leave, and probably a lot of them are poor enough to where are they going to go?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
I've seen people in this country in that same attitude, like, where can I go? It's just the despair of the situation. I mean, it's certainly, I think if anybody merits the refugee status argument, it will be the South African farmers very quickly.
And they are not getting it. The only people,
Yeah.
well, like we talked about the other day, the only people who are actually extending a hand of welcome are the Russians. The Russians are not stupid. And these South African farmers, right, in the face of that kind of adversity, that must have toughened them up. And Russia, opening their arms and saying, come here, have, 10,000 acres to do with it as you will. What do you think is going to happen to those people? Those South Africans are going to flourish, And yeah, sure, the people over the age of 35 will probably never learn Russian, but the younger generation, they will become completely assimilated. And it will be a boost for the Russian population, because you're just saying, yeah, maybe they take in 15,000 farmers, which isn't a lot if you think about it on one scale. But on the other hand, it is a lot. And if they're
That's 15,000 farms times probably 1,000 acres on average.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
That is quite a lot.
Yeah. And people who are motivated, because that's the other thing. See, never underestimate the power of motivation. If somebody is truly motivated, they really want to, make it. There's nothing that can't be done. That's the secret of the United States, because in the past, the people going to the United States were going there because they were motivated, because they wanted to make it. They wanted to make money, grow, build something. And that was America's comparative advantage, and it served the United States very, very well. It's only as of late that a lot of the immigrants, it seems, are just getting a lot of social services and welfare benefits that, if those were stripped away, I wouldn't really have a problem with illegal immigrants. If all those, any kind of perk was stripped away from illegal immigrants, and they were not allowed any kind of social service at all of any sort, no problem with illegal immigrants. Okay,
that's basically the position of Janusz Korwin-Mikke, the Polish MEP. He's basically said, look, amongst other reasons that Poland does not, and Eastern Europe doesn't have a migration problems, because we don't have a social net. They're not coming to us to live their life. They're coming to Germany. They're coming to France. They're coming to England, because you guys believe in handouts.
Right.
And that's your problem.
Yeah.
And I think, part of that is probably true. I also think, going back to South Africa, the like you said, the potential upside of the South African farmers going to Russia are very good. If they can take advantage of it. I think the net outcome of the black South Africans will be, if they get the farmland, they'll just starve themselves to death because they won't know how to fucking use it.
Yeah, I think it's going to be another Zimbabwe. Yeah.
And I think on that front, I would stress, I probably could never, convince a very strong public campaign of this, but I would love to see it where everybody just says, Mr. President, you should not give one fucking dime to the South Africans and for any form of financial aid or food aid after this reappropriation of the land, because it was outright theft. It was, and it goes against our values as Americans. I play that fucking card.
Yeah. And
simply say, if they believe that this is best for them, let them experience the growing pains of learning how to fucking feed themselves.
Yep.
And if that means half the population goes away, so be it. It couldn't have happened to a better group of people.
That's life, Life sucks, get a helmet. My thinking, look, I've always been against the Bismarckian welfare state. Because yes, it assuages our conscience. All these poor people. The homeless people. This, that, the other. Yeah, it does assuage us as a nation, but it is bad for the nation as a whole long term. Because if you give handouts, you incentivize people not to look after themselves and their own. Okay, if you would not have had the explosion of single mothers among the black population that you do. You would not have had the collapse of the family unit among blacks if had it not been for the Great Society, quote unquote, TM of Lyndon Johnson, which was catastrophic for the black family. Patrick Moynihan predicted it, and he was vilified as a racist back in 1965 for saying it. And what he said, everything turned out to be true. Everything turned out to be true of what he said in 65 or 64, whenever he issued his report. This was a catastrophe for black families, because when you don't have that kind of incentive, you depend on one another. Families depend on one another. And they come to agreements and negotiations, and the people who have to get the handout, they sort of like suck it up and have to deal with it. And it incentivizes them to go out and get the fucking work, and not be a fucking lazy bum, or not be sucking at the teat of the other family members, right? There are direct and obvious advantages to it, but the government just giving you money, EBT cards or whatever the fuck, it is a disaster long term, fuck it, short term, because it disincentivizes you. It allows you to think to yourself, oh, I don't have to really work because I'm getting my check.
I think this is part of the reason why, in particular in Britain, and I think Peter Hitchens talks about this very well, to have which is to say that youth unemployment, the NEETs,
Yeah.
as it were, of Britain, is monumental, in part because of those subsidies.
Yeah.
It gets to a point where your whole life is subsistence.
Yeah.
You have no hope of getting a job, and you don't have any motivation to do anything. And I've seen, my fiance's cousin is like this. She's hasn't had a job in her life. I think she's in her mid-20s at this point. The part of the reason they say she can't get a job is because she has social anxiety disorder, and she freaks out in an interview. And my response is, fuck off, take a few more interviews until it calms down.
Yeah.
Everybody feels that nervous during interviews. You only get around it by keep on doing them and not giving a fuck if your first one doesn't go well. Your fifth one or your sixth one or your 28th one will go well. You only need one of them to go well. And that's how you work through it. But because of the subsidies, it's and the not needing to work, she can have all these excuses all she wants. I have this anxiety, or the fucking Thatcherites are just stealing away my benefits.
Yeah.
And all of this kind of stuff. There's an emptiness and a hollowness to the society that it creates. And I'm talking about white people here now. Yeah. I'm not even talking about the minority situation, which certainly isn't going to make anything easier. There is a sacrifice that is made as a result of that. And I think we may have talked about it before. This is fundamentally the reason why I cannot morally stand behind a universal basic income.
Oh, no, it would be catastrophic. It would be catastrophic because it would basically give an incentive to people to do nothing. And they would stop living and just exist until they died. They'd be just like cows in a slaughterhouse. They would have no purpose. It would be catastrophic because the thing is, ultimately, a life is given meaning by struggle, by the fight, by wanting something and trying to achieve it. That's what gives life meaning. If you don't have that struggle, if it's taken away from you because you have a universal basic income or whatever the fuck, right? Or your parents are giving you a big allowance or allowing you to live in the basement, that kind of life kills you. It kills your spirit. Look, the researcher Calhoun discovered this when he created the mouse paradise back in the 60s. If all your needs are met and you don't have to actually work, you degenerate, you decay, and you don't flourish, and your society will die. That's the big lesson of the Calhoun experiment. I don't quite understand why people don't look at that experiment and are horrified by it, because that was a mouse paradise, and they didn't flourish.
Yeah, and was it, correct me if I'm wrong, I know this was an experiment, I'm aware of it, maybe the same, where they had a population of mice, they gave, there was unlimited supply of food and water, And ultimately, what happened was overpopulation.
No.
Basically Blade Runner kind of situation. This was
No. That's the thing. Calhoun thought it was going to be a overpopulation nightmare. Okay, he created a cage that would allow for 10,000 mice or something like that. And he started with like 20 males and 20 females or something like that. Okay, and the thing is, see, the population increased. It increased dramatically because it was, ease of life. They were able to flourish. But what happened was that the population tapered off, peaked out, and then started to decline. They never hit the upper limits of the size of the cage. They didn't even come close. I think the highest they came, the peak of the population was something, I could be wrong, but I recall something like 60% of the cage was filled at the peak, or 59%, something like that. But I could be wrong, okay? I mean, don't quote me, but I know for a fact that they never came even close to filling the cage. And that was the thing that in the first time they did the experiment, that Calhoun was shocked that the population started to decrease. And so they reiterated the experiment like 3 or 4 times. And each iteration, it was exactly the same. The population would rise dramatically and then sort of level off and plateau and then start to decay. And what was interesting was the way it decayed. You had populations, mothers that would eat their own young. You had males that would garner all the females, and the females would flock to those males. The males weren't like looking for them. They were just like the alpha males, and the females would come to them. And there were all of these incel rats, incel mice, who didn't get any pussy, and there were like these mice that Calhoun started calling him I forget how he called them, the delicate ones, the beautiful ones, because they would constantly groom each other, and they never had sex, and they were constantly grooming each other and one another, and trying to be like these perfect little specimens, right? It was all very bizarre, and he did it enough times, enough iterations, that the stereotypical behavior became apparent. It was clearly a function of this mouse paradise. It's a fascinating study. Maybe I'll do a video about it. I ought to do a video about it. And we should do a podcast about it specifically, I would suggest, because it really is fascinating. It's a fascinating experiment because, see, it was a paradise, just as Western civilization is a paradise. We have no idea how lucky we've got it. We are truly living in a peak of human civilization. And the fact of the matter is, this peak is decaying. Okay, or I would venture to say that the peak really is our rearview mirror, and that we are slowly decaying, and things are going to get fucking ugly. That's my thinking, frankly.
Well, did I ever tell you the thought on this very topic from one of my favorite authors, J.G. Ballard?
Mm-hmm. No.
So for those of you who don't know J.G. Ballard, you're probably familiar with him as the writer of The Empire of the Sun, the Steven Spielberg movie. That was basically his boyhood in Shanghai.
Yeah.
That was somewhat autobiographical. But he was very famous for being a sort of surrealist author in his latter years of science fiction-ish related things. And he wrote the book Crash, which was about basically people getting sexually aroused by being part of car crashes. But his attitude was, they say, why do you write so much surrealism? He says, well, I live in a surrealist society. The Western cultures are extraordinarily surreal. Suburbia is surreal. It is an organized paradise and calm. You look at the world as a whole, and the destructiveness, the cruelty, the struggle that is in there, that's the reality. We're living in this extreme situation, and God help you if it ever collapses and you get to see what the normalcy looks like.
Yeah, exactly. And on that cheerful black-pilled note, I think we're going to call it a podcast. Yes, that's the beautiful normalcy that you are experiencing now, dear listener. See, it is an illusion, and the chaos is underneath the bed, and it's going to come out of from underneath the bed, and it's going to eat you alive, and it's going to rip you to shreds, and strangers are going to come with machetes and try to burst into your house. Oh, by the way, did you see that video of that woman? Who some random guy tried to break into her house, and she had a shotgun and send him running.
I did not see that, but did she pull the trigger?
No, she didn't, unfortunately. She was a more humane person than you and I would have been, because in that situation, somebody tried to break into my house in broad daylight. The guy started ringing the bell, started trying to break through the door, and eventually did manage to break into the house on the front through the front door. And she had a shotgun. You see the guy like running for his life out the door. It was really damn funny. But anyway, so on that cheerful note, get yourself a shotgun and prepare for the apocalypse. So that's been the Coach and Benway podcast, and I want to thank you for listening. Dr. Benway, would you like to leave us with a final thought before we depart?
Make sure you subscribe to the New York Times and read all the news that's fit to print, you for disgusting fucking white people.
Yes. Yes. And on that cheerful note, take it easy.